folks, and welcome to the 7.4 reading guide, The Republic Struggles. Rome's around for 2,000 years, but we know the democratic portion of it, the Republic, was around for only 500 of those 2,000 years, and then it switched over to a monarchy, or otherwise known as an empire, with one person in charge. So things are going great for the Romans. They're on their way up, but the government just can't survive the change that they're going to make. So Rome began as a small city-state. It did conquer a large area around the Mediterranean, but the system of government did not survive the change. Who did Rome fight with for control of the Western Med, and what were these wars called? There was a civilization, a very large civilization in northern Africa called Carthage. Now remember back to the Iliad, the sequel, the Roman version, sequel of the Iliad is the Aeneid. And Aeneas makes it to Carthage when he's supposed to be in Rome. And we do know what happened, that he fell in love with Dido. They became schmoopies, and then Mercury said that, Jupiter wanted him to get to Rome, and so he left her, and she killed herself. And the Aeneid predicted eternal strife between the Carthaginians and the Romans. And we get it here because they're going to fight a series of 3 wars, and they're some pretty serious wars, and they're called the Punic Wars. So where was Carthage? It was a city. It was actually a large civilization in northern Africa, but it also controlled parts of Spain and actually controlled the whole island of Sicily. Now you know where Sicily is located. It's right off the tip of the boot, and so too close for comfort for the Romans. First Punic War is basically a tie. They don't really mention it in the book, but what happens is that both sides just agree to stop fighting. The Carthaginians didn't really need Sicily, and so they go ahead and they just give Sicily to the Romans. So if you had to pick a winner for Punic War number 1, we'll talk more in detail about these at a later date, but if you had to give a winner, I guess it would have to be the Romans, although they had a huge death toll on both sides. Neither one of them would have been able to fight a war right after that because of the heavy losses. But if you had to pick a winner, I guess you'd have to say the Romans, because they were given Sicily, and that's what they were after in the first place. So your book does decide to pick up. It doesn't talk about the First Punic War at all. It ends up talking about right into the second. And this is where Carthage really came really close to destroying the Roman Republic, and it was because of this guy, the greatest general, and his name is Hannibal. And you got to be, oh wow, can I? Oh no, I can't do anything. I thought I could highlight that. I thought that would be fun, but doesn't look like I can do that. All right. So anyway, this guy. Oh, there's the highlighter. This guy was a very serious general. He was somebody that even today, the military academies in the United States study his battle strategies. One of the classic strategies that he had was the pincer movement, and it's where you let the other side think they're winning, think they're winning, think they're winning, think they're winning, and then you close a trap. And it looks exactly the way you would think it would look. It's like a crab, like pincer, a claw on a crab, and just closes shut on the enemy. And I'll show you some diagrams of the pincer movement. But Hannibal also was very shrewd, not just with his military strategies, but when and where he decided to attack. I mean, the Romans really could not beat him in Italy. And to get to Italy, he did something very daring. The Romans never thought somebody would march over top of the Alps. And this is what Hannibal ends up doing. He takes 40,000 men. He takes 40 war elephants, and he somehow gets them from Spain to the base of the Alps on the European side of the Alps. He crosses over somehow into Italy. Although he does lose many men and almost all of his elephants, he makes it through. Had he made it through with all of his elephants, I think that we might be talking about a unit on Carthage and not a unit on the Romans. But he does have a lot of casualties trying to get across those high mountains with animals that aren't really equipped for snow. None of the Romans had ever seen elephants. It's not like there's zoos in Italy at the time. So imagine the psychological component of seeing an enemy fight with animals that you've never seen before. It would be something that would be a huge advantage for the Carthaginians. So through clever tactics, Hannibal does defeat 3 huge Roman armies. The armies were actually bigger than his, and I think he thought the Rome would surrender, but they actually didn't. They had a strong resolve, and that was the Roman strength in Punic War number 2. They were fighting on their homeland. and they did keep up the fight. And what happened was that gradually they were hoping that there would be a war. It's called a war of attrition. And the war of attrition basically is where the other side just gives up and leaves. And that's what the Romans were hoping to do because they couldn't beat Hannibal in open battle, open conflict. So Hannibal finally does have to sail home to Africa in 204 BCE. And what happened was that there was a Roman general, and his name was Scipio. And Scipio has a great idea. He's like, okay, well, we can't beat Hannibal here. Let's get him out of Italy. So he actually takes an army and sails across the Mediterranean and attacks Carthage. And once word gets to Hannibal that his homeland's under attack, he does return home. And Scipio has a secret way to defeat the war elephants, which I will not divulge in this video, but I will when we talk about it during the Paradex slides. But Scipio has a secret weapon, and it defeats the war elephants, and he wins this battle, a huge battle at the Battle of Zama. So Punic War number 2 goes to the Romans as well. And then finally, many years later, after Rome had been defeated, after Rome had defeated Hannibal, many of the Romans still feared Carthage, and there was a senator named Cato that every time he'd give a speech, he would, say at the end of it, Carthage must be destroyed. Eventually, over and over and over again, until the Carthaginians were viewed as a threat. Now, they were rising as far as economy goes again, but they were never going to be able to, produce a military that would be able to compete with the Romans ever again. But the Romans decided that Carthage came so close. Hannibal's name was still uttered on the Italian peninsula as, somebody that people should be afraid of, that there could be another Hannibal coming out of the Carthaginian Empire. And so in 146 BCE, Rome attacks Carthage. They actually forced Carthage to break a peace treaty, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. And the Carthaginians are forced to fight. Rome attacks, and it's more of an extermination than a war. Punic War number 3 is a very lopsided win for the Romans. They burned the city to the ground and looted it, and any survivors, they were sold into slavery. So now Rome's got all this land, and really it was really productive for them, a big bonanza. They got fertile land for growing wheat in not only Syria and North Africa, but also they pretty much had all of Spain under their control then, took it from the Carthaginians, and there were rich silver deposits there. So Rome does control most of the lands along the western half of the Mediterranean, so then they started sending armies to the east, and they conquered Greece and parts of southwest Asia. We'll be talking about a guy named Pompey, Gnaeus Pompey Magnus, and we'll talk about his conquests in what is now known as the Middle East. An empire is a state containing several countries or territories, and basically what a state is, it's a government or an organization or a civilization. What are provinces? They're areas within a country or empire, and who did govern those? Well, they were Roman magistrates, and many of them were corrupt and cruel, and they ended up not treating the people of the provinces very well. So what were some of the growing pains that were brought on by these new riches? And there's a great song, a hip-hop song from the 90s by the notorious B.I.G. and Puff Daddy, who I believe now just might be called Diddy, or maybe just he goes by his real God-given name, Sean Combs, I'm not sure. But they had a great song back in the early 90s, and the title of the song was Mo Money, Mo Problems. And basically what the song was about was that the more money you have, the more problems you have. It's just like a different set of problems. And the Romans end up having mo money and mo problems because the bonanza of slaves brought into Italy ended up really affecting the farmers. The farmers ended up not being able to compete. We talked about this before. The slave labor was cheap, next to nothing pretty much, and so the individual farmers weren't able to compete, and the gap between the rich and the poor started to become staggering, and these tensions started to affect Rome's political system. Then, to add to the problems, you had the magistrates out in the provinces, and they were stealing from the people in the provinces. They were looting rich foreign enemies. And basically, they were becoming very powerful, and they were understanding that you could break the rules of the republic and even resort to violence to win elections and to get what you wanted. And so these magistrates are starting to learn that maybe it's the most powerful, warlord that can win an election instead of the person that's probably best for the job. Biggest problem in the cities were the urban poor, and it's because the tenant farmers, who were people that leased land from landlords, they were put out of work by the slave labor. Basically, remember, they got Walmarted, and most of the unemployed farmers came to the worst place you could come if you're a farmer. Your skill set is farming land. The worst place for you to go is into a city, and that's where they go. They went into the city of Rome to try to find work, and so the government started to get worried because they had all these people without jobs. They were trying to figure out what they were going to do with these people. They were hungry, and a hungry mob is not a mob that you want to face because they'll do anything to feed themselves and feed their family. So then they started the world's first public welfare system. They started giving out free grain and entertainment, actually, just to keep these people happy and to keep them from starting riots. Politicians then figured out if they supported gangs, these gangs would then vote for them, and so it ended up being like the highest bidder would be the one that would get, support from a gang. So there were some guys that tried to change this, and there were brothers. Their names were Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, and they did try to give land to the poor. They started limiting, they were in the assembly. They were both tribunes of the plebs, and what they tried to do is they thought, all right, well, the rich need to give some of their land up, and so they tried to limit the amount of land that a patrician could own, and then once they ever put that limit on whatever it was, if you owned more than that, then it went to the government, and then that was redistributed to the poor and the people that needed land. Well, of course, the people that own the land, the patricians, they're the most powerful people. They're not gonna go for that, and so they actually had both the brothers killed on separate incidences. The older brother Tiberius, and then later on Gaius. A different Gaius. This was a very popular name back then, kind of like, I don't know, Tom or Joe or Pete, or I don't know what a real popular name is today, but Ralph. But back then Gaius was very popular. And there was a very famous general, his name was Gaius Marius, and he was a powerful consul who did reform the Roman army. And what he did was this: he made Rome a professional army. And this is important because what happens is that before, the only people that could join the army were people that were rich, that could afford their own armor and their own weapons. But now, when you make it a professional army, this is your only job. You are a soldier, and the government pays for all of your equipment, and that should say change from before, not kahanj from before. And it is a change because before everybody had to provide for their own equipment. So when you're part of a professional army like the United States Army, you're provided with weapons and ammunition and Kevlar, body armor, helmet, boots. And that's provided for you because it's your job and you work for the government. And so Marius was one of the first ones to do that. And then finally, in return, upon retirement, they were to be given a plot of land. Now, this is an important thing that happens for the Romans because the unemployed now have a chance. The poor have a chance. They can join the army, they can train, and then this is the biggest thing right here, because in the ancient world, and even today, if you own this, you have money. Land equals money, not only in the ancient world, but today. Now, here's the problem. These people, these soldiers who worked for their commander or their general, started to give their allegiance just to them instead of the republic, because the commander paid them, the commander made sure that they got their land upon retirement, and so their loyalty wasn't to Rome and the glory of Rome. Their loyalty ended up going to boss man, the guy that was in charge. And so when this happens, when your loyalty is just to one person and not to a government, you have the chance of a revolt, you have the chance of a civil war. And the first one that kicks off is between Marius and Sulla. Sulla was a consul, and the assembly voted to strip him of power and give the power to Marius. And so Sulla marched his troops on Rome, and he actually wins, and he becomes dictator for more than a year, and names himself dictator for more than a year. This is important that Sulla marched his troops on Rome, because here you've got a Roman general in charge of Roman soldiers leading troops against fellow Romans on the homeland. This is unheard of, that Romans would fight Romans for power. They're not having any allegiance to the government or toward the Roman Republic at all. The allegiance to the boss man who pays them and gets them the land at the end. So after Marius and Sulla, there were two other famous generals. One was Gnaeus Pompey Magnus, just pretty much known as Pompey, and then Gaius Julius Caesar, also just known as Caesar. Pompey conquered Southwest Asia, pretty much what we know today as Israel, Syria, the Middle East, pretty much. And Gaius Julius Caesar was in the West, conquering Gaul, which is modern-day France. So Pompey and Caesar actually were bros for a while. They had a bromance. They used their influence to run the government together, and they just pretty much ignored the Senate and ignored all the laws and customs of the Republic. And they actually invited Cicero to join their team, and Cicero was real mad because you know how much he felt strongly about the Republic. He thought it was unconstitutional and would not join. He said it would have been bad for the Republic that their merger that would go together. So basically, then what happened was that Rome wasn't big enough for both of these guys, and Pompey and Caesar end up being afraid of each other and decide to feel the other one was gaining too much power. So Pompey pulled a backdoor trick and had the Senate declare Caesar an enemy of the state and to give up his legions. Well, news got to Caesar while he was fighting in Gaul that the Senate wanted him to return, but without his army. And Caesar was like, "Yeah, you guys think I'm an idiot? You think I'm going to come home without my legions? I know what's going to happen. I'm going to be jailed. I'm going to be in prison. I'm going to be executed. There is no way I'm coming back." And then he started thinking about it, and he's like, "You know what? I will come back, but I'm going to come back with my boys." And so Caesar marched on, and this should not say Pompey, this should say Pompey, and the city of Rome, and he actually wins. Pompey has to flee to Egypt, and Caesar defeats Pompey in the Senate. Basically, he tells the senators, "Well, you sided with the wrong horse, you big dopes," and he basically seizes control of the Senate, and he says to them, "You know what? You guys can just take the rest of the, your careers off. I'm going to be dictator for life." And of course, the senators do not like that at all, and they feel that they can preserve the republic, and they feel they're justified to preserve the republic with an assassination attempt. And they assassinate Julius Caesar on March 15th, 44 BC, in the Roman Senate, thinking it would save the republic, but actually it plunged it into further chaos. What groups did Octavian, who was Caesar's nephew and heir, defeat? Well, Octavian was in Greece studying. He was 18 years old when his uncle, his great uncle, his grandma, and Julius Caesar were brother and sister. He comes back and he leads a group of people that are loyal to Caesar, including Caesar's legions, and they hunt down the assassins, and they are all killed. And then later on, there's yet another civil war between one of Julius Caesar's old friends. His name was Mark Antony, who had been led astray by the beautiful queen of Egypt, Queen Cleopatra, and we will talk about their alliance in a couple of days. And so they joined up together on opposite sides of Octavian, and Octavian ends up beating them as well. So the dust clears after all these civil wars and after all these Roman deaths in 30 BCE, and the only one standing is the great nephew of Julius Caesar. His name's Octavian. And by this time, the republic is gone, and now it's an empire. It's a monarchy. Octavian becomes the first emperor, and he's actually nicknamed Augustus, which means honored and revered one. He's given that title by the Senate, and I think the Senate gives him this title pretty much because they're afraid of him, because they know that he has the people on his side because he's Julius Caesar's heir. He's got the military on his side because he's Julius Caesar's heir, and he basically could kill all the senators if he wanted to and not get in any trouble. And so the senators decide to play the nice game and try to honor Octavian by giving him this nickname. So what reforms did he have? Well, first of all, he sticks it to the Senate by making new rules for the membership in the Senate. He increased the property requirement. He prohibited senators from business involvement. He said that he was allowed to lead Senate discussions and also introduce and pass laws. He also made it his right to appoint new senators, and he really did a nice job pretending to respect the Senate. Kept telling the senators, "Oh, we're going to restore the republic. Let me just get everything back under control again," kind of like Cincinnatus, "and I'm just going to hand it all right over to you." But he did hold all the real power. The senators basically just became a group of glorified advisors. There was no real, leadership coming from the Senate, starting with Octavian/Augustus until the end of Roman history. So one thing you do need to know is you do need to know that Octavian Augustus is the same guy. Basically, I'll refer to him as Octavian until he becomes the emperor, and then once he becomes the emperor, he picks up the nickname Augustus, and he becomes the first emperor of a long line of many emperors in the Roman Republic. Well, that is it. I want to thank you all for listening. Take care.